Hello, everybody. Simon Dixon here, and today I want to give my perspective on the Hong Kong riots at the moment and the situation in Hong Kong. I'm going to avoid the politics as much as I can and really focus on the financial aspect and the new angle that's coming along with bank runs so that I can continue helping people understand. But in previous videos, I often talked about that it requires some kind of catalyst event for the financial crisis to be triggered. And I often said that, the last one was a little island called Iceland that was taken over by investment bankers that destroyed the whole island by pushing debt onto it. And that was a trigger after the subprime crisis to actually trigger off the global financial crisis. And I talked about you just need one political systemic risk event that can expose the fragility of the financial system. And the situation in Hong Kong could be that event. And it could be the one that exposes the weaknesses in the financial system. And so what I wanted to do is give you an update on some of the financial implications of the Hong Kong riots. And also, it's a subject that's close to my heart because many people, maybe you know or maybe you didn't know, but up until March 2018, I lived in Hong Kong and spent 4 years in Hong Kong. And it's a place very dear to my heart because it's probably the place that I lived in the world where I experienced the most amount of freedom of anywhere I've ever lived. And as well as safety as well. I mean, it's a country that had very little crime. It was the most capitalist, efficient economy, and where I experienced the most amount of economic freedom out of anywhere I've ever been or lived in the world. So it's a very close and dear to country to my heart because I've got so many fond memories from my time there. But also my perspective on Hong Kong, just to give some background before we go into the financial part of it, is that again, yeah, it's the economic freedom in Hong Kong was such an internal feeling that you only get when you live there out of everywhere, that I've been. And so I can empathize with the emotion that's running in Hong Kong right now in order to try and maintain that. My experience of people in Hong Kong being, very generalist. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule and everyone's unique. But in general, I also spent a lot of time in China. China was, my book, Bank to the Future, which was the first published book I know in the world that included Bitcoin, sold more copies in China than anywhere in the world. So when I used to give a presentation in China, I would always be blown away by the experience of having thousands of people in the audience, in a very humbling experience because many of them got into Bitcoin as a result of reading the Bank to the Future book, which was published in Mandarin. And so I also have experience of how the different demographics and cultures in China feel. Some of the people that empathize with the Communist Party because they went from a world of having nothing to having something and being a statistically significant economy. And then there are other people, the younger people, from my experience in China, that can't relate to the communist ideologies because they were brought up in a world where China was a superpower economy already. And therefore they just, saw the suppressiveness of communism as opposed to, the growth story and the change of their economic life as a result of some of the changes that have happened in China. So my goal is not to really go into the politics, but just help people understand that, both these economies are very near and dear to my heart. But they are very, very, very different economies. There's a border in Shenzhen and when you across it, or to Macau. that things are run in a very different way. And the people in Hong Kong, they see themselves as very separate to people in China. My experience is sometimes to a very negative way, where you have this kind of semi-racism between Hong Kong people and Chinese people, which can be some counterproductive at some point, given how important Chinese money is to the Hong Kong economy. But at the same time, it's a very peaceful place. It was one of the most expensive place in the world that I've ever lived. Real estate and property prices are insane. Rental prices are insane. But it's the price that you sometimes pay to live in a very freedom orientated economy. And so when some of that freedom and culture is caused into questions, emotions are going to be high. And I do think it's a worthy thing for the protesters to be fighting for, because it's such a important thing when this place, Hong Kong, has been through so many different cultures and so many different changes over the years as a result of politics. So those are, some kind of background on why this is, I believe that it's an important fight to fight for. But focusing on the financial side, so Hong Kong dollar is an interesting economy. If you've watched some of my previous videos, I talked about 6 forms of money, and the difference between money that's created by the government and money that's created by the banks. All digital money is created by the banks, and cash and coins in most economies is created by a mint, and the proceeds of it go to the government. Well, Hong Kong dollar is a very interesting economy and very much a different currency. If you take a Hong Kong dollar, it's actually printed on that Hong Kong dollar which bank created that money. So they take turns. It could be HSBC or Standard Chartered. And they actually get to brand the notes. So in Hong Kong, they don't hide the fact that banks create money. They print their logo on paper notes and coins. And the digital representation of the Hong Kong dollar, which is created through a fractional reserve banking system, whereby whenever you borrow money, it creates this new digital currency called the Hong Kong dollar that exists in your bank, the digital currency. That is created in the same way, perpetuating a debt-based economy. Just check out those 6 forms of money if you want to understand more about those forces. A couple of other things that's notable about Hong Kong. Several years back, I think it was maybe 2013, 2014, 2015, I can't remember. If you Google or go to YouTube and put Simon Dixon CNBC, I gave a talk. I think Bitcoin was $300 at the time, and I was talking about how undervalued it is. And I was getting a big grilling from the presenters on CNBC. But I put up a debit card, and this debit card that I presented on CNBC, I covered the numbers of it because it was actually what I was using when I first moved to Hong Kong in order to actually survive, because I didn't have a bank account in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is very much a cash economy. Cash is very important in Hong Kong, but it also transfers millions in digital currencies through the banking system as well. Well, sorry, not millions, billions, if not trillions. It's a statistically significant and important economy in the world. But the Hong Kong debit card was the very first debit card that I ever used, where I could actually load up my Bitcoin and it would appear in my debit card as Hong Kong dollars. And then I could use it anywhere that the Union Pay is the main equivalent of Visa and MasterCard. Also, if you check out a video that I created on Simon's future vision for banking, it was 7 years ago, where I was forecasting about Facebook becoming a bank, and also went through the Octopus Pay situation, where Octopus, the system used to pay for public transport, almost accidentally became a bank, and the banks complained, and then the Hong Kong Central Bank gave it a banking license when the banks were trying to protest against its closure, when they called it an unlicensed bank. So there's very interesting parts this played in the future of finance. Also, when I first moved there, I had my Hong Kong dollar Bitcoin debit card. There's about 30 Bitcoin ATMs in Hong Kong at the moment. And so you could very much rock up with, you could put Bitcoin onto a debit card. You could spend it anywhere. Union Pay was accepted, which is the equivalent of Visa in Hong Kong and China, and various other places in Asia. And then you could go to a Bitcoin debit card, take out cash, and participate. So you could live your whole life off Bitcoin, and not rely upon everyone wanting to accept that Bitcoin in order to live. And that's exactly how I lived when I first moved to Hong Kong. But the interesting next approach or strategy that seems to be adopted right now is that the protesters and other people just looking at their financial affairs are starting to wonder whether Hong Kong is the best place to have your money. Personally, I moved all my money out of Hong Kong, both personal and business. The banks in Hong Kong are not necessarily, crypto friendly. So I, personally decided to move my financial affairs out of Hong Kong. And I think many other people are doing the same. And so, Hong Kong has gone from really much a freedom orientated safe haven to political uncertainty as a result of trying to defend that freedom, as often is the way in these political times of uncertainty. But there's been talks for the first time of a bank run, and a bank run is an interesting concept and could be one of those trigger events that I talked about. You need the global financial system is systemically unstable, and it's propped up upon a Ponzi scheme that is one of the largest regulated Ponzi schemes in the world, called fiat currency, which is also propped up by real estate and property. Now, the Hong Kong market very much has got one of the most overinflated property markets and real estate markets in the world. It's insanely expensive to rent a tiny little apartment there, or to acquire real estate. But it's been propped up for many years on Chinese money. And so people in China looking to make investments, in an environment of capital controls, whereby they're only allowed to hold so much foreign currency by the Chinese government's capital controls, look for different assets and ways to invest their money. And Hong Kong has been, a place that China has parked its money by investing in real estate, leading to many of the native Hong Kong people having to move to the outskirts on some of the Hong Kong islands, while expats and China money kind of push up the property prices beyond control. So what the latest talk is about, how many people are exiting Hong Kong dollars and converting it to US dollars or other currencies, as a result of these protests, causing potential bank run. So there's two forces here. When the banking system does not have enough cash to meet the liabilities that they create whenever they create the digital version of the Hong Kong dollar through issuing loans, and it's all backed by debt. So when people want to convert those currencies to dollars, or they want to withdraw them as cash, there's the potential of a systemic risk event that can take down the Hong Kong banking system. And if you take down the Hong Kong banking system, it will expose the systemic nature of the global financial system and can be the type of trigger event that can lead to a global financial crisis. I'm not saying that will happen, but these are the type of systemic risk events that I'd be concerned about in determining or trying to get ahead of any trends that could happen as a result of these currency wars. So what I've heard, and I can't substantiate this because I can only go off what people that I'm dealing with and experiencing, but there is a big shortage of US dollars in China. And a big shortage of US dollars in China means that more and more people are converting and trying to accumulate, US dollars in this type of environment. Now, there obviously is capital controls, but the masters of the financial system know how to get around those through extensive structures. The interesting thing about Hong Kong is that the Hong Kong currency is not a free floating currency. It's pegged to the dollar, and it's got a very effective peg to the dollar because it holds so many reserves in US dollar. So whether there is a shortage of US dollars because let's say there's a shortage of dollars in China, and then they start looking at some of their Hong Kong dollar wealth or wealth that they've stored in Hong Kong, and then they start to try and accumulate dollars through the Hong Kong system, where the Hong Kong relies a lot upon some of the savings of the Chinese economy. Then you could end up with a danger and a threat to that peg as people question whether the peg can actually be maintained through their US dollar reserves, as that leads to a shortage. So these are the types of events and knock-on effects that can occur. And so Hong Kong very much depends upon that US dollar peg. So these are some of the interesting things, and the protesters are now putting out a strategy of converting all your Hong Kong dollars into US dollars, or going for a bank run and trying to cash in on the bank, and using that as an approach and a strategy in order to try and get further with their cause and their fight for maintaining freedom and the other things that they're protesting for within Hong Kong. So these are interesting forces, and tie into currency wars and tie into other videos and previous videos I've got where this could be a potential for the black swan event that exposes the financial system in an environment where the US dollar is strengthening and strengthening and strengthening, which also causes challenges to the US economy and some of the trade wars that China engaged in, as well as trying to attain the Hong Kong situation. I think there's some interesting forces. So really, I do believe that everybody in Hong Kong should have an emergency Bitcoin fund. Obviously, we don't know where things are going to go next. We don't know what happens in the scenario. But what this does is it exposes that if there is a run on the Hong Kong banking system, they can either do a few things. The government can exercise some kind of bailout. They could do what they did in Greece, where they can shut down ATMs and stop you accessing your cash. Or they could do what they did in Cyprus, where they could try to recapitalize the bank by just using your deposits. So I do believe that everybody should have an emergency Bitcoin fund. If, for whatever reason, the situation in Hong Kong escalates to the next level, and some of the military force at the border in Shenzhen decide to enter, then I believe that Bitcoin is way more important to have than your US dollars. When I moved to Hong Kong, I didn't have a bank account, but I was able to use my Bitcoin debit card, the Bitcoin ATM system, and Bitcoin for the international transfers as a way of surviving while I got access to banking and fixed all those things. If the situation gets political and you lose access to your banking, then this is a true use case for Bitcoin. And you don't want to be trying to figure out how to get some money out of the bank and accumulate Bitcoin when they have already shut down the bank and people are queuing outside for the run. I'm not saying these events are going to happen, but I do believe that everybody in Hong Kong should prepare for such a scenario and be hedged with finance that they can access, that they can spend, that they can move without any dependency upon the banking system, no matter what happens with the political uncertainty. And if this does go to the military stage, then a lot of people, Bitcoin could be your only way of getting out of that country, should that happen. I'm not trying to fearmonger because I don't know or understand enough about the current politics and whether it's going to get to that situation. But I do believe accumulating Bitcoin, if you are based in Hong Kong, and having an emergency Bitcoin fund is something ultra important, especially as there is a shortage of USDs. And when people and more people are actually trying to, the Hong Kong central bank could decide, in order to maintain the peg, that they're not going to allow people to convert to US dollars. And at that stage, that could lead to an ultra high Bitcoin adoption as people looking to accumulate their emergency funds, and recognize that the true use case of Bitcoin is money that you can own, money that you can spend. And as people start to experience that there is a fixed supply of these Bitcoins, and as more and more demand happens for them, then the value of their wealth tends to go up over the long term. This could be an event for Bitcoin adoption, should more and more people in Hong Kong understand that they need to start hedging themselves, they need to start protecting themselves, and an exit from the financial system is an important force. Now, also recognize that this could also cause real estate property effects. So if more and more people in China are looking to sell some of their real estate, it has been reported that people are selling it at losses now. But it kind of highlights to people that holding money in real estate, illiquid assets, trying to sell at a loss in order to get liquid, is another use case for Bitcoin as well, because it's so much faster and more liquid than real estate is. The real estate market is definitely propped up by Chinese money, and the political uncertainty between China and Hong Kong could lead to more and more people wanting to sell that real estate and sell that at a loss. And if I were them, I would be looking to sell it for Bitcoin, not for money in a banking system that could be subject to bail-ins, bailouts, and systemic risk events. So I think this is all driving the forces that, if anyone's is selling real estate, I would be looking to do that for Bitcoin, rather than something that can get locked and stuck in the banking system. Because when you deposit your money at a bank, the bank becomes the legal owner. They can spend it as they choose, and if they don't like how you want to spend it, then they can just stop that under the guise of anti-money laundering laws, but also politics. And that is one of the user case. So I would be selling for censorship-resistant money that you can own, money that can't be confiscated unless they actually try to take your physical, but it's a lot harder to do that than just seizing your bank account if they don't like what you're doing. And also remember, if you're involved in protests, they're going to be getting your IDs. Those IDs could be connected to the fact that they could just hold your money in the banking system. And they have every authority to do that, because when you deposit your money at bank, you're giving it legal ownership of that money to the bank, and then you're subject to the politics of those systems. So those are the types of things that I think are important. Some random thoughts around Hong Kong. I do hope that this ends in peace. I hope that this isn't the systemic risk event that it could be. But I also believe that people should be protecting themselves in times of economic uncertainty. And a Bitcoin emergency fund is, I believe, a very, very compulsory, important tool to have, so that you can protect yourself regardless of what happens. And what is highlighted to me is that the most freedom-orientated, one of the safest economies I've ever lived in, just at the flick of a switch, can change its political environment just like that. And so the use case of the Bitcoin emergency fund, I believe, is important, not when it becomes an emergency, but to accumulate before it's an emergency, so that we can have this apolitical financial way of transacting, regardless of whatever happens and what decisions your government actually makes. And I also talked about in my other video, which was a controversial video, about how Bitcoin could become a world reserve, one of the world reserve currencies and assets by 2020. If the Hong Kong Central Bank has a shortage of US dollars, then Bitcoin's always an option as well. So these types of forces get people thinking and get central banks thinking as this most interesting time in financial history unfolds itself. Please protect yourself. Please start to understand that everyone is speculating in a speculative world, and you're either having other people make those decisions for you, or you're going to consciously educate yourself. So please help me spread the word. I'd love for as many people in Hong Kong to watch these videos and start to think about how they're going to look at and maybe decide to make some moves. So please do retweet, please share, please head over to my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, and subscribe, hit the bell symbol, and YouTube will send you a email each and every time I go live, as I'll be providing commentary and my personal views and opinions as everything unfolds in one of the most fastest changing moments and uncharted territory that we're now experiencing in financial history. So please do help to get the word out there and spread the good words. Thank you for your time. I'm going to get back to work now, helping companies build the future of finance. Thank you.